I'm joined by Deven Ghelani. Good afternoon to you, Deven Ghelani.
Good afternoon. Hi, Sheila.
You're the director of the Policy and Practice think tank, but you have a connection to the creation of universal credit. Could you describe what it is for me?
Yeah, I guess let me start. I've got huge empathy for everyone who's coming into contact with the benefit system for the first time. That's how I got involved in the benefit system after being made unemployed myself. And I started to, when that happened about 10 years ago, I started to argue for a simpler system. So I was part of the team that made the arguments for a single benefit system like universal credit. So I've been part of universal credit really since it began. I think you're seeing it really scale up massively right now as people are coming into contact with it. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the results of people coming into contact with the benefit system for the first time right now. And seeing what they're eligible for, both how much and whether different people being able to get different amounts.
What seemed to have been the problem, or part of the problem before, and seems to be the problem now for many people, is that the idea behind it was that when people's circumstances changed, the benefit system could be more fleet of foot in reflecting that change in their circumstances and therefore reflecting the amount of money they got or didn't get. Stop me if I'm talking nonsense, but that was my understanding of what the fundamental shift was meant to be because of simplifying things under universal credit. But what I'm hearing from people is that they are either not hearing anything back, or that their circumstances are proving too, quotes, complex to be on the receiving end of universal credit.
Yeah, so I think that flexibility is true once you're on universal credit. I think what we're seeing now is a historically unprecedented, and we're using that word a lot, but I think this is kind of well beyond the norm, of over 1 million new universal credit claims in the last few weeks alone. And I think what we're seeing is a system that is rising to be able to cope with that volume and to be able to cope with that number. Again, with, I think, some people obviously having to be patient to get through, to make their claim, to get their first payments. I do think, again, compared to perhaps what was there previously, having to go to different agencies, if you had right now to go to your local authority for housing support and DWP for job seekers allowance and tax credits if you're still receiving some income, that would be many times, at least 3 times as difficult, because you'd be doing the same thing 3 times, rather than just going to one place. If you are eligible for universal credit, I still think it's a better place to be right now, and it's coping with the surge in demand reasonably well. Although, of course,
but is there an argument? I hear what you say when who wants to have to ring 6 places when you can ring 1, but equally, hasn't the complexity that would have entailed for the recipient been shifted to the system that's meant to deliver it, and that the system isn't working?
Yeah, the complexity is there. The benefit system is complicated, and as I say, I've got huge sympathy for everyone coming into contact with the benefit system for the first time. I think the lady just before the news had savings above £16,000 and therefore wasn't eligible for anything. We've called for the government to suspend that savings threshold for at least a year. It doesn't apply to tax credits. I don't think it should apply to universal credit right now, for the arguments that I think it was Fenella made on your show earlier.
Fenella, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of complexity in the system, and for people who are coming into contact with it for the first time, it's difficult to navigate. And that's so one of the things I can give you a short summary of kind of general guidance that people can follow. But if listeners go to betteroffcalculator.co.uk, they can very quickly see what support they might be eligible for.
Betteroffcalculator.co.uk.
Yes, that's one of the tools we put forward to help those struggling with coronavirus, and the implications of that.
I'll repeat that before 3 so that people have it. Can you explain more to me about boyfriends and girlfriends, husbands and wives, if they are claiming and their partner's circumstances are taken sort of fully into account, up to and including that whether their partner has tax savings in their business?
Yeah, so if they are, universal credit is a joint claim, so it's made on the basis of the household rather than the individual, so it's based on household income. And so the income of the partner will be taken into account for that universal credit claim. So yeah, that would be you'd need to take both of those into account. I guess what I'd say to your listeners, just to give everyone listening a very short guide of what they should be thinking about doing and in what order. Firstly, if you can get furlough payments from your employer, that's the first thing you should do. Or if you're self-employed, HMRC should be writing to you this month to get access to the self-employed support scheme, which is fundamentally it's more generous than universal credit. For those of you, for listeners that can't get onto those schemes but have savings below £16,000, they should apply for universal credit, but they should also contact their local authority for council tax support or free school meals, or other support that might be. Some local authorities also have emergency funds available and are doing a huge amount of work to help people.
And am I right in saying that you actually favour bringing things like that into universal credit as well, council tax support?
Yeah, we've argued for that really from the outset. I'm surprised it was left out at the beginning. And I think, having one place to go, again, that calculator, betteroffcalculator.co.uk, tells you if you're eligible for support. That it doesn't just look at universal credit, it looks at kind of other support you might be eligible for and gives you the whole kind of picture in the round and where to go to apply for those things too.
There are a lot of people out there who feel daunted and haven't got round to doing it yet, maybe even feel some shame at applying for universal credit, and there are people facing delays or facing just not getting a response on the telephone or online. What do you say to those people, other than stick at it, I suppose?
Yeah, I think being patient is important right now. Again, kind of across the country, we're having to be patient to get into the supermarket. For example, we might have to wait outside 2 meters behind the person in front of us. We're having to be patient in a lot of areas, and I think kind of making your claim for benefits is one of those. One thing Universal Credit has done more recently, I think just in the last week or so, is have a We'll Call You service. So if you make a claim online, you can put your phone number in, and rather than have to wait on the phone, which was what some people were doing for literally hours when the support scheme, when they were first having to claim a couple of weeks ago. Now the DWP will call them, but the claim will be active only when you submitted your online claim. So it is something, if you're thinking about applying for universal credit, the advice I would give is don't hesitate. Go online, do it now. Check if you're eligible first if you want to, but the sooner you do it, that's when you'll be eligible for, and that's when you'll start to receive support payments from universal credit. For those of you that need money now, for listeners that need money now, when you apply for universal credit, you can also apply for what's called an advance loan, which means they'll put money into your bank account more or less on the same day. That is money that will have to get repaid later on, but there's no interest or anything like that with it. So you can get money right away. Your first kind of official payment won't be for another 5 weeks, but you can access that same level of support today if you need it.
And are you confident? I mean, you may not be sufficiently on the inside to know, but are you confident that a system that typically was dealing with 200,000 people and is now dealing with 1.4 million people in the space of a month can cope with that? Has been sufficiently boosted to cope with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's showing that it's coping now. Again, it's under great strain, but I think it's been able to cope with not only the huge spike in demand, but also quite fast-changing legislation. So universal credit's gone up. The standard allowance has gone up by £20 per week. There's some extra support for housing for some people that qualify for it. So it's been able to cope with those changes too. And I think it's there for people. Yes, when they claim, they're having to be patient on the phone, and there's certainly some issues. We hold an online forum, and a lot of people have had difficulties, for example, with verifying their identity with universal credit. But once they get through that stage, I think most people have found the claim process relatively straightforward, and we'll see. We should see, I think, in the next or so, people starting to get paid their first official payment after having made those claims after the pandemic measures were announced. So it's holding up certainly better than I think the legacy best benefit system could ever have done in light of.
Well, I hope you're right. It's just that for many people, even those calling me this hour, there are people who are very much in a pickle and just sitting on their hands and waiting after calling and calling and calling. But I am heartened by your optimism about it. Thank you, Deven Ghelani, Director of the Policy in Practice think tank.